Hi, thanks so much, Michael. Thank you very much to ACODE for having me and for Griffith for putting on such an amazing event. I'm just blown away by some of the presentations, the workshops, the sessions today that I was able to get to. Yesterday, I have to catch up, I must admit, on a few of the sessions from yesterday in the recordings, but they were amazing, and I feel extremely privileged to be able to deliver the closing address in terms of our AR, VR and our 3D concepts that we've been looking at over the last few days. Thanks, Michael. It was a lovely, very kind introduction. What I wanted to talk to everybody about this afternoon was a combination of my journey essentially into this immersive learning situation. As Michael mentioned previously, in my past life, I was a physiotherapist, still am a physiotherapist with 25 years experience before coming to Griffith 10 years ago to embark on what has now become a wonderful academic career. I'm really loving the move to learning and teaching and embracing all of the things in that space for me. And I guess for me, the thing that I really wanted to focus on was my students. In a way, I thought about it initially as the patients that I used to have. I really loved being able to make them feel better. So I wanted to embrace that kind of concept with my students. How can I get them to love what they're learning and find a way that works for learning for them? So over the last 10 years, I've taught in the areas of both physiotherapy and the allied health sciences schools at Griffith, and also now for the last 5 years, I've been a part of the School of Medical Science. And this is sort of the journey that I wanted to talk to you about specifically. I guess the one way that I can capture your attention maybe is a disclaimer out there for the graphic images you may experiencing in this afternoon's presentation. So I do have images from the cadavers that I have taken in the lab to show you. That's what my presentation is about. So hopefully you're all okay with visualizing those. So my project arose out of a small Griffith grant for learning and teaching a few years ago. And what I wanted to produce for my students, although there was a wealth of opportunities for different applications, as we've seen across the last 2 days, augmented reality, virtual reality, and we have access to the Visible Body program at Griffith. We also have a brilliant body donation program at Griffith, and I wanted to make use of those cadavers that the students were utilising within their learning activities in the classroom. They were seeing again in exams, but they really didn't get an opportunity to see in between. So I wanted to produce an online activity for them that they would be able to engage with. So this is our wonderful facility. Our anatomy lab sits on the 10th floor here. We get to have an overview of the Griffith Gold Coast campus, the skyline. So it's very conveniently located across from the Griffith University, the Gold Coast University Hospital. And the project that I was involved with, specifically I wanted to design an e-learning tool that was able to be developed with high resolution images from our actual cadaveric specimens in the lab. The 2D images were post-processed to create our 3D rotating brains, and then we formed a set of formative quizzes that the students would be able to utilise as revision exercises during the weeks prior to their lab exam. I wanted to also provide different levels of difficulty because my particular course arose out of the move to a trimester system at Griffith. So I offer anatomy and physiology systems 1 and 2 in trimesters 2 and 3, which act as an opportunity for academic recovery for students that may have failed in the previous trimesters, in addition to taking those that might like to commence in a later trimester and be more flexible with their offerings, spreading their subjects out across the year. So The first cohort of anatomy that runs in T1, offered in traditional mode, caters to about 900 students. So I have an almost ready-made cohort. About 40 to 50% of my students traditionally have been repeaters from that large cohort. And I have about 200 students each trimester that are enrolled in my mixed mode version. So we have our pre-recorded mini lectures, which of course has been ideal in the current circumstances to already have those lectures up and running online. Ordinarily, I would deliver in-person tutorials and laboratory experience, but this coming trimester at the moment, of course, I'll be delivering those through Adobe Collaborate Ultra for our tutorials, and we'll also have Teams meetings and group discussions and virtual laboratories being run. So this has really fed into that nicely in the production of this a couple of years ago. At this point, I'd really like to acknowledge two very important people in this project. Dr. Abdullah Karaksha was my colleague who was responsible and integral really in producing the quiz component, the e-learning tool component, and Associate Professor Gary Grant has just been incredibly generous with the use of his tools and toys that we've been able to share and utilise in this experiment or this project. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So the rationale behind what I wanted to do and why, obviously the emerging trends in anatomy education, we've seen a wealth of those over the last couple of days. The computer-based multimedia, we know that integrating traditional learning styles with multimedia styles can enhance student learning. VR, AR, 3D models from a wealth of different types of hardwares and software backgrounds, web-based games coming into the market, and also that changing digital literacy of our students prior to even the need this year was starting to feed into the fact that we were looking at introducing additional revision tools in an online format. Additionally, we've had increasing student enrolment numbers each year, and this has been particular in the large courses. We offer foundation year health will cater to anatomy and physiology courses for a number of health degrees. So they might be students studying medical science who will then embark on their medical degree, biomedical science, health science, our occupational therapy, physiotherapy, exercise science students, dentistry, pharmacy. So a very wide range of degree programs are taking this course in first trimester, and some of those would then be taking it in my course in second trimester. So as I mentioned, about 900 students in first trimester and about 200 students in second trimester. Across those programs then, we certainly find that the laboratory space is becoming a premium. So a lot of our students are finding there's little opportunity for revision, in particular of the cadaveric material, after their allocated laboratory session. So initially, they would have their laboratory session booked and that would be the one that they're enrolled into. Sometimes there is an alternative class they may take if they've missed it due to illness or work reasons. In my course last year, I found a number of students were caught behind traffic on the M1 coming down from Brisbane to the Gold Coast campus, caught behind car crashes in the morning and then missing their lab. And there was not another opportunity to revise that content then. And in particular, we found that my course is taken intensively. So I run 12 weeks of content across 6 weeks, which is a really important factor when we're looking at no opportunity for a revision lab. They have a fantastic anatomy learning centre to access, which has models, 3D printed models. We also have plastinated specimens, we have potted specimens, and we have textbooks and posters and so on that they can access, but they can't access the wet cadavers. So we needed to find an alternative that maybe we could offer the students. Where to start? There's a whole lot of the human body that I could have looked at. I chose the nervous system, And the nervous system, particularly because of the difficulty of the content and because of the cognitive load the students were under at the time they were learning the nervous system, is the time that they're studying for their mid-trimester exam for me, covering the content in the musculoskeletal system. So I wanted something that they could go back to at a time that suited them prior to moving on into the following system or module the next week. So the expected outcomes then, I wanted my students to be able to revise the difficult laboratory content in a flexible format that's self-directed, blended learning environment. More importantly, I wanted them to have that true reflection of the cadavers that they see in the anatomy learning environment. So in terms of constructive alignment, what they were seeing in their learning activities, immersing themselves within that active learning situation in the anatomy laboratories, and that they were seeing again in their assessments at the end of trimester and just prior to the end of trimester. I wanted them to also be able to utilise those same images in some format for revision activities online. The 3D nature of the rotating brains would be able to assist with their development of visuospatial awareness, and I hoped that it would also build their confidence in online learning. This is a first semester or possibly their first semester, first year course. So that introduction to online learning if they haven't had that exposure prior to coming to university. I also wanted it to be cost effective, equitable and sustainable. And in terms of a large database for the number of different specimens that we could identify across the whole human body, it needed to be something that students would be able to access, which they can at no cost to them if they're enrolled in my subject. I also wanted to make it available as a resource for students moving into more advanced anatomy subjects such as neuroscience, neurobiology or neural basis of movement in their second year. Why you're here is to see what we did. So this is the setup that I had in my laboratory. You can see there, and looking back at this morning's session in the quickfire sessions, I know that David and Bryony were talking about the different images that they took through their particular system that they had set up, moving 5 degrees and taking 72 images. And that's in fact the setting that I used with our system. So this is the Iconosys 360 computer controlled photography setup. You can see here that there's a turntable that we're set up with to start with. That's connected to the laptop, and also the camera is connected via USB. So it's a fully automated integrated system defined by the user in the first instance. And there are a few different settings that we could choose, but we found that the 72 images provided us with that full 360-degree movement without too much jumping once the image loaded in the interface for the students to engage with. So the turntable, we can see here my little 3 kilogram, 2.5 kilogram brain was the specimen that we chose. Apt with that spherical nature, it suits the rotation system, so it really was a great place to start. And that's sitting on top of a Perspex plate that was then illuminated by the Iconosys LumiPad LED lighting system. So that comes with a back lighting system and the 2 side lights, and that particular setup then allows for eliminating shadows behind the image. Not only that, when the specimen is sitting on that Perspex sheet on top of those acrylic risers with that lighting in the background and the camera flash, it then gives that impression of the specimen being suspended in space. So the Canon EOS DSL camera was an 1100D, hooked up, as I mentioned, via USB and cabled to our laptop. That was preset with the software that comes as a package with the Iconosys turntable system, and that's the ShutterStream 360. So that has a number of different settings, as I mentioned. Its job is part of its job is to when triggered by the camera, it will automate the turntable for moving, and then the shutter stream will also be integral in terms of the batch editing part of the process and the post-processing of the images to create that 360 degrees rotating brain. So just quickly then, if it wasn't for collaborating with pharmacy, I definitely wouldn't have had these particular images. And also I noticed, Bill Wade, in your chat message earlier, you were asking about 3D scanners versus the work that David and Bryony are doing. And in fact, my application for my small grant for learning and teaching was for a 3D scanner initially, and it just came through a happenstance meeting with Gary that we were able to borrow nicely his tools. He was also very excited because he'd previously been creating 3D images of his medications in pharmacy for a virtual laboratory, a virtual pharmacy. So he was quite excited to digitize brains rather than boxes of medication. So I selected the human cadaveric specimens that the students were using in the laboratory. So they were having that complete, constructively aligned design of what they were seeing in labs. They were then utilising for revision, and they were seeing again in exams. The Canon EOS 1100D was the camera used. Iconisys 360 computer-controlled turntable that was responsible for that automated image capture and integrated turntable movement. The LumiPad photography lighting system, and then the shutter stream software, which was a part of the package initially. So the student interface was created specifically for anatomy and physiology systems 1. They ended up with 9 rotating videos and 7 interactive quizzes that we deployed through Adobe Captivate. They were then embedded within the course site. You can see here that the e-tool was available for students to utilise, which came in about their 3rd week of my 6-week course, which is when we study the nervous system. They were able to access this tool for their revision before and after labs, in fact, and then prior to the laboratory exam. So when we were creating the videos, I mentioned the camera and turntable were connected via the USB to the computer. We chose the option of that turn, stop, snap workflow to be a 5-degree movement initiated through the software that would take the photo, trigger the turntable to move 5 degrees, stop, take another photo until all 72 images were captured and processed to create that 360 degrees video. Which was then output in an MP4 file. Each of those images, the 2D images, was around 2 megabytes each. So by the time we have 72 of those, about 130 megabytes per specimen file. I know storage has been a topic of conversation, so it is something we really have to think about. With only 9 specimens, this is just the brain. No other part of the human body. That's about 2.8 gigabyte of files. So it is something we really need to consider in terms of our storage. So what I've created here is a little screencast of the rotating brain as it results from those 72 images. The limitations in terms of the functionality is that we only get to see it rotate in one plane. I would dearly have loved to be able to have it rotate in 3 degrees of movement, but unfortunately we weren't able to. The benefits of this particular playback method is that we are able to stop and then manually drag it around, so we could slow it up, go back to a part that they wanted to look at again. You can see here the biggest benefit of I think this software and these images is that incredibly great resolution. So you can see right down to the fine layers of the meninges and the cortices, which the students could really benefit from that depth of being able to view the cadaveric material again. A lot of their textbook and online learning, of course, is color-coded to make learning easier, but it doesn't reflect what they would see in their exam. So I really wanted to have that better alignment with what they would see in their assessment again. So that's what the little rotating brain would look like. I've just got a second one here to show you to account for the different the inability to move through multiple planes. I then just moved one of the specimens into sitting on the posterior side of the brain so that we could then get a full view of the inferior and superior surfaces as it rotated. This particular one, I specifically wanted them to be looking at the cranial nerves, which are on the inferior surface of the brain anyway, and the red there is the siliconized arterial circuit of the brain, so the blood vessels covering the surface of the brain. So when they're zoomed in, they're really nice and easy to locate, and you can see quite a good depth. The disadvantage of this zoom is that you cannot scroll in and out, but we can set it to not zoom in as far in the Shutterstream software prior to processing. Just need to reprocess it if that's the case.
10 minutes to go, Leanne.
Thanks, Simone. So that gives you an idea of what the rotating ones look like. So in creating the quizzes then, we initially deployed through Adobe Captivate 9 for the quizzes, and they were embedded within the course site. We targeted 3 levels of difficulty for identifying those structures. Initially, we wanted a drag and drop that was nice and simple, that students were already provided with the terminology. And then the next level was that they would need to label it, so they needed to be able to spell correctly in order to move through the quiz. And then the higher level thinking was actually being able to recall the functions that were associated with those regions. So we could target different levels of learning at different paces. An image from the quiz that contained the drag and drop, you can see the terminology is on the left-hand side, spelt correctly. So it was easy enough for them to just locate. If they managed that correctly, they hit submit, they're able to move on to the next level of difficulty, which was the labeling section. Again, a nice clear image from those same images used to create the rotating brain, so it was familiar for them. They would have an open box that they just needed to type in to spell correctly. Adobe Captivate does have the glitch in that the functionality only allows for one correct spelling as an answer option. So if they didn't get it correct, they were booted back to the beginning to try again. Not a bad thing when we're looking for correct spelling, but it is an extra cognitive load on those students that perhaps may have been repeating and were already struggling. So they could redeploy this as many times as they like, and so they were able to utilize it until they got the correct answer. Again, hit submit, and if they did get to that point, then they were rewarded with their trophy image at the end with correct spellings and labels that they could then screenshot and save for their revision. We gave the students in class or paper-based survey of a usage and satisfaction survey. So it was nice to see that 61% of them either agreed or strongly agreed that the e-tool was a useful way to learn the structures of the nervous system. A few disagreed, but my feelings are they were the students that actually had trouble with the technology in the first place. In addition, they felt more confident, so 57% at least said that they've strongly agreed or agreed that they were more confident in using an online tool, which was one of our key objectives in the first place in delivering the project. But uniquely and I think interestingly and also rather satisfying from my place as an academic in teaching, and I love immersing my students in that lab experience, is that they did not prefer to replace their online learning with digital learning. They did really value its component as a supplement to their laboratory learning. So that was a big 85% did not want it only, but they did want it in addition to the laboratory experience. So to conclude, the students suggested that they liked the realistic and interactive nature of the e-tool. They did find that the images were better than the textbook or on the net in their opinion, which I was happy to see. They did prefer the face-to-face lab, but valued the e-tool as a supplement to their learning. Technological difficulty was a key factor in reducing student engagement. And interestingly, although the surveys were not identifiable, there was an option to include their current GPA, and it was noticeable that the students that liked the online tool and engaging with technology did have higher GPAs. So it was an interesting outcome to think about, and really important in terms of going forward and having different levels of difficulty to cater to the diverse nature of my cohort as well. They did need regular reminders. I run an intensive course, so I do need to give them an every week email announcement, reminders on Facebook in our course site group, and this coming trimester it will be in Teams of what's available, where to find it, and to continue to pursue looking for those available resources. What am I doing now and in the future? I have a lot more images, lots more of the body or the human anatomical systems to take. I've got some skulls and some hearts at the moment, but the turntable size does limit me to about 9 kilos at the moment, and spherical objects are certainly a lot easier to keep in focus. Long, lean limbs like arms to take muscles and images are a lot more difficult to remain in focus, so they do pose a problem. There are larger turntables available. There are large and extra large available that can cater up to 20 kilos and much heavier than that if we were to invest in another set of turntables.
5 minutes to go.
Okay. Slowing the rotation of the specimens and zooming in to alter that distance, I think I'd prefer to do so that it's a little less intrusive on the eyeballs if you're certainly looking at a large screen when you do hit the zoom. And Adobe Captivate was rather clunky and was the mainstay of the reason for their technical difficulties. When it deployed outside of the learning management system, there were pop-up blockers left, right and centre, and some students just chose to abort that situation immediately and didn't try further. So this year we're redeploying through Articulate Rise 360, which looks a lot like Microsoft Sway, except we can integrate those quizzes within Articulate Rise, and it has been used successfully in T1 in one of our chemistry courses as well. And I'd also like to consider my large percentage of my cohort does have English as a second language. They're already trying to learn Latin, another terminology, and trying to translate that through English is quite tricky. So I'd like to add some support with the slides on sound bites and also characters from different languages, and Chinese is the first that I'm looking at working with. Thank you so much for persevering with me and listening through. I apologise about the slow start to the session, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into the cadaveric 3D brains that we're utilising. I just wish I could take it apart and get inside it like we can with a lot of the other AR and VR models that have been shown over the last couple of days. But thanks so much.
Cool. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Leanne. What I waited to Leanne to tell people was that Leanne was also the University's Vice-Chancellor's Teacher of the Year last year. And you can see why she is. The passion she has for her students and her teaching is quite infectious. So well done, Leanne. Well done. Now, is there any questions in there, Simone, in the question and answer section?
I haven't seen anything come through yet, no. I think everybody was just in awe.
Yeah. So while I do, of course, being the host, I do have a couple of questions prepared, but please feel free to add in some questions into there, because it's not about me and it's not about Leanne, it's about you and actually being able to gain as much understanding from us as possible, and particularly Leanne at this point, of course. So Leanne, so you've created these yourself. How do they differ from other resources that might be out there, like that publishers do and things like that? What's the advantage to you?
Specifically, it was what we were using in our labs from our body donation program at Griffith. That was the big attraction for me, so that they were able to have the same resources for their learning activities in the lab itself, and then being able to see in an online space, but within their course site, obviously, what they were then going to see, expecting to see again in their assessment at the end. So it was the cadaveric images that were really the big draw card. There is an opportunity to label the 3D rotating brain as well, but I would need to go into each of the 2D images and stick a little label up and make sure it's in the same spot on every one of those 2D images as it rotates to be able to have a label as it pops up. So it's probably not the best in terms of functionality for that. There are some better ones in terms of the holograms and the visible body program where we can remove parts and layer down into the HoloLens is awesome as well.
Yeah.
I was loving listening to Travis's talk yesterday morning. We do have a HoloLens in the School of Medical Science. The problem is that the ability to deploy that information to nearly 1,000 students. And so we were sort of trying to find something that was very cost effective. The other thing, a lot of the apps that are available for our mobile devices and so on, some of them are free, not all of them are free. And I didn't want students to have to pay a cost. If they needed to upgrade to get the full functionality, that was going to be an additional cost to them. And some of the free ones, I must admit, are not always perfect. We're not all perfect. There are imperfections, and so we wanted to make sure that they were getting a consistent set of resources. By all means, they can look elsewhere, and a lot of them do purchase, additional resources as well. But in the end of trimester sects and sets, there was often comments saying, well, where are the rest of them? So that's promising.
That was quite a different answer than I was expecting, actually. I mean, I was expecting you to say something like, well, Queenslanders have far more sophisticated brains than other people. So
I keep saying my brains. They're clearly not my brains, but they're the ones I spend my time working with. Yes. No, we're so fortunate. We have a brilliant body donation program, and we're lucky to be a part of. And the tech team that run that program for us are fantastic, and we certainly couldn't do what we're doing without them. So I'm really spoilt with a view, as well as the team that I work with, and the generous nature of the colleagues that I have at Griffith. That this wouldn't have happened without happenstance and networking and meetings and just putting yourself out there, I suppose.
So how many people do you have a team to help you, or do you do it a lot yourself, or
Well, at the time, Gary owned the equipment as such, so he and I and Abdullah were in the labs, and the technical staff up in the anatomy lab taking the images. Gary assisted. He knew the software well, so he processed some of the images overnight. He knew it like the back of his hand, and so he did a lot of that work, the preliminary work for me. But yes, taking the images, it was probably a few hours in the lab on 2 separate days that we took. So to get through the rest of the body systems, which is now I happened to have a Teams meeting with Gary last week, and he said, Leanne, we've got to get back in there. Let's do more. So we will. It's been a while. It's Michael, it's just been time. That's all I can say. It's just been time, and knowing that, the funding was there to get the equipment, not the time taken to produce it. So, and then Abdullah spent the time on the e-learning tool. He had, his PhD was based in e-learning tools in pharmacy. So that is where that came from. So we each took a little different area. There were a larger project team that I was working with their experience in anatomy teaching. But in terms of the actual production of the brains as such, it's the 3 of us.
Cool. Excellent. Simone, is there any questions in there now?
Yes, we've got a question. Did you find there were any problems using the glass plate on the turntable in terms of glare or reflections? Have you compared it to laying the object on the original white turntable itself?
So it's a Perspex plate, so it's not glass, but it's specifically sold by Iconisys as well. So it's meant to be used with that illuminating system, with the LumiPad system, to elevate it and appear as if it's suspended in space. The other thing was, if we put it straight on the turntable, there is actually, it's not a complete sort of flat surface, I guess. There is also the prongs that feed outwards to hold the riser. So for want of better description, the brains are kept in fluids in the buckets in the lab. So we needed to have a surface. The Perspex provided a perfect surface to be able to clean afterwards, and so we couldn't have the cadaveric material touching the actual turntable itself specifically. And there's also an issue, obviously, for us around the sensitive nature of the cadaveric brains. So right now, it's kept within our learning management system for the benefits of learning and teaching for students, and for me being able to share that information with you in that learning and teaching platform. But our Transplantation Act in Queensland does limit us from where else the cadavers can go.
Okay.
How broadly they can be broadcast, I guess.
Yes.
Yep.
Any others, Simone?
No, that was the only one that's come through so far. Okay,
cool. So Leanne, thank you so much. That's been fantastic. We are drawing to a close in terms of our time. We've only got 7 minutes left on our schedule, but I think if you could all, no, you can't turn your mics on because it's a keynote presentation. I'm going to have to clap for you and say thank you very much. And, there we go.
Thank you. I can hear the production team. That's very sweet of you. And thanks to everyone for hanging in there for the afternoon. Hopefully you can all go and get your little celebratory glass of something or cuppa for the end of the day. Thanks, everyone.